In 1944, as German tanks roared across the Western Front, a humble American vehicle changed the war: the Willys Jeep. Small, rugged, and seemingly endless, this off-roader became the backbone of the Allied armies, carrying troops, supplies, and hope across the battlefields. Welcome to German generals were astonished at the endless supply of Jeeps from the United States. An audiobook that immerses you in the story of how a simple vehicle baffled the Wehrmacht, broke through its lines, and became an icon of victory. Prepare for a journey through factories, trenches, and the heart of a war transformed by four wheels. After D-Day, German generals like Rommel and Guderian relied on their panzers and blitzkrieg tactics, but they soon noticed something disturbing. Endless waves of Allied jeeps, moving like swarms, appeared on every front. These vehicles, capable of crossing mud, sand, and snow, transported soldiers, evacuated, wounded, and carried messages under enemy fire. A German general, captured in 1944, writes, "The Americans have a vehicle that never stops." This book explores that wonder, revealing how the Jeep, with its simplicity and abundance, defied the Nazi machine. The Jeep wasn't just a vehicle, it was an industrial miracle. In 1943, the United States produced 600,000 Jeeps, while Germany struggled to manufacture 10,000 Kelvin Zubel wagons. Willys and Ford factories, working 24/7, shipped Jeeps to Europe, Africa, and the Pacific, exceeding all enemy expectations. German reports, found in archives, show bewilderment. Their vehicles appear like ants. This audiobook takes you to those assembly lines, where workers and machines forged an avalanche on wheels that overwhelmed the Wehrmacht. The Jeep's versatility was its strength. In the Battle of the Bulge, Jeeps evacuated 1,000 wounded under bombardment, saved trapped patrols, and carried light artillery into impossible positions. Allied soldiers, dubbing it the modern horse, used it for everything: reconnaissance, transport, even improvised dogfights with mounted machine guns. One driver recounts, "The Jeep was our best friend. It never let us down." This book celebrates that adaptability, a factor that left German generals speechless. The psychological impact of the Jeep was profound. German soldiers, trapped in lines without fuel, watched Allied Jeeps moving relentlessly. In Normandy, a single battalion used 200 Jeeps to flank German positions, breaking through their defenses. A German officer writes, "Their vehicles surround us. We cannot match them." This audiobook captures that despondency, a contrast between Nazi scarcity and Allied abundance that eroded Wehrmacht morale. Jeep production was a logistical triumph. Liberty ships carried thousands of Jeeps to Europe, while Allied workshops repaired them in hours. In 1944, a Jeep could be operational in a day, compared to weeks for a German vehicle. An American mechanic writes, "We kept the Jeeps rolling, no matter what." This book honors that effort, a pillar of the victory that ensured the Allies never stopped. German generals tried to copy the Jeep, but their industry, crippled by bombing, couldn't compete. In 1944, Germany produced 5,000 Kelvin Zubel wagons, compared to 300,000 Allied Jeeps. A German engineer laments, "We can't match their speed." This gap, amplified by the Jeep's mobility, marked the Nazi decline. This audiobook explores that disparity, a moment where industry triumphed over arrogance. The Jeep also inspired Allied soldiers. Driving a Jeep under fire, knowing they could overcome any terrain, gave them confidence. In Operation Cobra, Jeeps carried infantry 20 miles in one day, breaking through German lines. One soldier writes, "With the Jeep, we were unstoppable." This book captures that spark, an engine of Europe's liberation. The Jeep's legacy transcends the war. After 1945, it helped rebuild Europe and gave rise to the civilian off-road vehicle, a symbol of freedom and adventure. In the 1,950 seconds, Jeeps worked on farms and in jungles, bringing the spirit of 1944 to new generations. This audiobook celebrates that heritage, a reminder of how a humble vehicle changed the world. Subscribe, hit the bell, and join this epic journey through the impact of the Jeep, from the factories of Detroit to the battlefields of Normandy. Let's get started. Chapter 1. The Birth of a Humble War Machine. In 1940, as Europe trembled under the Nazi boots, the United States brought to life a vehicle that would change the war. The Willys Jeep MB and its twin, the Ford GPW. This small off-roader, designed to be simple, rugged, and versatile, became the symbol of Allied mobility. With a 60-horsepower engine and four-wheel drive, the Jeep could traverse mud, sand, and snow, carrying troops and supplies where tanks couldn't reach. This chapter takes you back to the origins of this humble machine, a testament to industrial ingenuity that left German generals stunned by its impact. The Jeep was born out of urgency. In 1940, the U.S. Army requested a lightweight vehicle to replace motorcycles and mule-drawn wagons. Willys Overland, Ford, and Bantam competed, but the Willys design, with its sturdy chassis and 2,400-pound weight, won. In tests in Maryland, the Jeep climbed 40-degree hills and crossed 18-inch rivers. One engineer recounts, "We created a horse of steel." This chapter captures that spark, a moment where simplicity became strength. The Jeep's design was revolutionary. With a folding windshield, basic seats, and no doors, it prioritized functionality. It could carry 800 pounds, reach 65 miles per hour, and be repaired with basic tools. In 1941, the Army ordered 16,000 units after seeing it in action. One officer writes, "The Jeep was ugly, but unstoppable." This versatility, combined with its ease of production, made it ideal for total war, a factor that surprised the Germans. Initial production was a challenge. Willys and Ford, working together, standardized parts to speed up assembly. In 1941, the Toledo, Ohio factory produced 8,000 Jeeps, with workers working 12-hour shifts. One worker recounts, "We knew every Jeep would save lives." This effort, backed by American industry, laid the groundwork for the onslaught that would overwhelm the Wehrmacht. This chapter honors that dedication. A pillar of victory, the Jeep was tested under extreme conditions. In the Nevada desert, it crossed dunes at 50 miles per hour. In Alaska, it withstood temperatures as low as -30 degrees Celsius. These tests, filmed for the military, demonstrated its endurance. One test driver writes, "The Jeep could go anywhere." This ruggedness, combined with its modular design, allowed the Allies to deploy it on every front, from Africa to Europe. This chapter celebrates that adaptability, a leap that changed the course of the war. The Germans, with their Kübelwagen, underestimated the Jeep. The Nazi vehicle, rear-wheel drive and weighing 1,300 pounds, was less versatile. In 1941, Germany produced 2,000 Kelvin Kübelwagen, compared to 16,000 Jeeps. A German engineer writes, "We did not anticipate their mobility. This gap, ignored by the Wehrmacht, allowed Jeeps to dominate the battlefields." This chapter explores that blindness, a prelude to German awe. Driver training was key. At Fort Benning, soldiers learned to drive Jeeps in mud and under simulated fire. By 1942, 10,000 drivers were ready, capable of repairing a Jeep in minutes. One driver recounts, "The Jeep was an extension of us." This chapter honors their skill, a factor that gave this machine its life in combat. The Jeep design was quickly perfected. In 1942, Willys added a more powerful engine and improved suspension. 4 GPWs, identical to the Willys MB, ensured mass production. One engineer writes, "Every improvement was a blow to the enemy." This collaboration between companies and the military produced 50,000 Jeeps in 1942, a number that baffled the Germans. This chapter celebrates this innovation. An engine of victory, Jeep logistics were a triumph. Shipyards shipped disassembled Jeeps in crates, assembled at the front in hours. In 1942, 10 Liberty ships carried 20,000 Jeeps to Africa. One logistics officer recounts, "The Jeeps arrived like rain." This network, backed by the American economy, ensured a constant flow, a factor that overwhelmed the Wehrmacht. Allied soldiers loved the Jeep. In North Africa, the British 8th Army's Jeeps crossed deserts, bringing supplies to Montgomery. One soldier writes, "The Jeep was our lifeline." This trust, fueled by its reliability, boosted Allied morale, a contrast to German shortages. This chapter captures that spark, an engine of the war. German generals, observing the Jeeps, were perplexed. In 1942, they captured a Willys MB, but could not replicate it. Their industry, limited to 2,000 Kelvin Kübelwagen, had collapsed. A German officer writes, "Your vehicles are a miracle." This chapter explores that disbelief, a sign of Nazi decline. The collaboration between Willys and Ford was key. In 1942, they standardized parts, producing 1,000 Jeeps per week. A factory manager recounts, "We were working to win the war." This unity, combined with mass production, ensured that Jeeps reached all fronts. This chapter celebrates that synergy, a pillar of victory. The Jeep inspired new tactics. In Sicily, Jeeps carried machine guns, flanking German positions. One officer writes, "The Jeep changed how we fought." This adaptability, combined with its speed, surprised the Germans, who had expected heavy tanks. This chapter honors that tactical innovation. Allied morale soared with the Jeep. Soldiers, driving under fire, felt a sense of freedom. In Tunisia, a battalion used 50 Jeeps to rescue 200 men. One driver writes, "With the Jeep, we were invincible." This chapter captures that confidence, a driving force of victory. The Germans tried to counterattack, but their vehicles were inferior. The Kübelwagen, slow in mud, was no match. In 1942, they lost 1,000 Kelvin Kübelwagen to 100 Jeeps. A German engineer writes, "We can't move like them." This chapter explores that impotence, a contrast to Allied mobility. Jeep production was a miracle. In 1942, 10 factories produced 100,000 Jeeps compared to 5,000 German Kübelwagens. One worker recounts, "Each Jeep was a step toward freedom." This chapter celebrates that effort, a factor that overwhelmed the Wehrmacht. Jeep drivers were heroes. In Africa, they drove under bombardment, carrying vital messages. One driver recounts, "We were the eyes of the army." This chapter honors their bravery, a factor that gave life to the Jeep. The impact of the Jeep was universal. French civilians, liberated in 1944, cheered the Jeeps. One resident recounts, "They were hope on wheels." This chapter captures that resonance, a vehicle that inspired everyone. The Jeep's legacy began in 1941. Its design inspired modern vehicles, from the Humvee to civilian off-road vehicles. One engineer writes, "The Jeep showed us the future." This chapter celebrates that heritage, a first step toward modern mobility. Chapter 2: An Avalanche on Wheels. In 1943, as the Wehrmacht struggled to hold its lines, a wheeled avalanche flooded the battlefields. The Willys MB and Ford GPW Jeeps. The United States, with its industrial machinery roaring, produced 600,000 Jeeps during the war, shipping them to Europe, Africa, and the Pacific in numbers the German generals could not comprehend. This mass production, a miracle of logistics and human effort, overwhelmed a Germany that was barely making 10,000 Kelvin Kübelwagens. This chapter takes you to the factories, ports, and fronts, where the Jeeps became an unstoppable tide, leaving the Wehrmacht stunned by Allied industrial capability. Jeep production was an unprecedented triumph. In Toledo, Ohio, Willys Overland assembled 1,000 Jeeps per week, while Ford, in Detroit, produced 500 daily. In 1943, 300,000 Jeeps rolled out of the factories, each assembled in hours using standardized parts. One worker recounts, "We worked until dawn. Each Jeep was for our boys." This effort, backed by 50,000 workers, ensured a steady supply that the Germans could not match. This chapter celebrates that scale, a pillar of victory. Liberty ships were the supply artery. In 1943, 100 ships transported 200,000 Jeeps to the front lines, from Normandy to Burma. Each Jeep, packed in wooden crates, was assembled in the field in a day. One sailor writes, "We had an invasion of wheels." This logistics, perfected by the Allies, contrasted sharply with German industry, crippled by bombing. This chapter honors that network, a factor that baffled the Nazi generals. German generals, like Rommel, were perplexed. In North Africa, they saw convoys of 500 Jeeps moving troops while their Kübelwagens broke down in the desert. A 1,943 German report laments, "The Americans have infinite vehicles." Germany, with destroyed factories, produced 5,000 Kelvin Kübelwagens that year, compared to 300,000 Jeeps. This gap, amplified by Allied mobility, marked the Nazi decline. This chapter explores that astonishment, a sign of American industrial superiority. Standardization was key. Willys and Ford used identical parts, allowing for rapid repairs. In 1943, a Jeep could be back in combat in hours, while a Kübelwagen required days. An Allied mechanic writes, "Our Jeeps never gave up." This simplicity, combined with mass production, ensured the Allies always had vehicles. This chapter celebrates that ingenuity, a factor that overwhelmed the Wehrmacht. The Germans attempted to replicate the Jeep, In 1943, they captured a Willys MB, but their industry collapsed, couldn't compete. The rear-wheel drive Kubel wagons got stuck in mud, while the Jeeps traversed any terrain. A German engineer writes, "We cannot match their simplicity. This impotence, in the face of the onslaught of Jeeps, eroded Nazi confidence." This chapter explores that frustration, a contrast to Allied efficiency. The workers' morale was high. In the factories, women and workers sang while assembling Jeeps. In 1943, 10 factories produced 300,000 units compared to 5,000 Kelvin Subelwagen. One worker recounts, "Every screw was a blow against Hitler." This spirit, fueled by Allied propaganda, kept the factories roaring. This chapter honors their sacrifice, a driving force of victory. Jeeps reached every front. In Sicily, 1,000 Jeeps supported the invasion, carrying artillery and troops. In the Pacific, they crossed jungles to supply bases. One officer writes, "The Jeep was everywhere." This ubiquity, made possible by mass production, surprised the Germans, who expected Allied shortages. This chapter captures that omnipresence, a factor that turned the war around. Allied logistics was a miracle. Mobile workshops repaired Jeeps in the field using off-the-shelf parts. By 1943, 500 workshops supported 200,000 Jeeps. One mechanic recounts, "We kept the war moving. This network, in contrast to the German workshops without spare parts, ensured Allied superiority." This chapter honors that effort, a logistical pillar. German generals, in their reports, described the Jeep as a plague. In Operation Cobra, 2,000 Jeeps outflanked German positions, moving troops at 20 miles per day. A Nazi general writes, "Their vehicles outnumber and outspeed us." This onslaught, impossible to stop, broke through the German defenses. This chapter explores that impact, a sign of Nazi decline. Production continued unabated. In 1944, the United States produced 300,000 more Jeeps, while Germany produced 4,000 Kelvin Subelwagen. Allied factories, protected from bombing, worked non-stop. One manager writes, "Our factories were the war itself." This chapter celebrates that scale, a factor that overwhelmed the Wehrmacht. Allied soldiers trusted the Jeep. In the Ardennes, 500 Jeeps evacuated 1,000 wounded under the snow. One driver writes, "The Jeep was our shield." This reliability, backed by mass production, boosted Allied morale, a contrast to German despair. This chapter captures that confidence, a driving force of victory. The Germans, with scarce resources, couldn't compete. Their vehicles, dependent on synthetic fuel, constantly broke down. In 1943, they lost 2,000 Kelvin Subelwagens to 200 Jeeps. A German officer writes, "Their Jeeps humiliate us." This chapter explores that powerlessness, a contrast to the Allied abundance. The collaboration between Willys and Ford was key. By 1943, they shared designs, producing 1,500 Jeeps daily. One engineer writes, "We worked as one." This unity, combined with logistics, ensured an endless supply. This chapter celebrates that synergy, a pillar of victory. Jeeps inspired new tactics. In Normandy, machine gun-mounted Jeeps attacked German positions, moving at 50 miles per hour. One officer writes, "The Jeep was a wolf. This adaptability, made possible by their abundance, surprised the Germans. This chapter honors that tactical innovation. The morale of American workers was unwavering. In 1943, 50,000 workers were producing Jeeps under pressure. One worker recounts, "We felt the soldiers with us." This spirit, fueled by the Allied cause, kept the factories running. This chapter honors their dedication. German generals, in their memoirs, admit their logistical defeat. In 1944, one general wrote, "Jeeps are the blood of the enemy." This unstoppable avalanche marked the Nazi collapse. This chapter explores that recognition, a sign of Allied victory. Transportation logistics were vital. In 1943, 50 Liberty ships carried 100,000 Jeeps to Europe. One sailor recounts, "Our ships carried freedom." This network, in contrast to the bombed German ports, ensured Allied supremacy. This chapter honors that effort. The impact of the Jeep was universal. French civilians, liberated in 1944, cheered the Jeeps. One resident writes, "They were freedom on wheels." This chapter captures that resonance, a vehicle that inspired everyone. Chapter 3. The Jeep in Action. On the battlefields of 1944, the Willys MB and Ford GPW Jeep became the modern Allied steed. From Normandy to the Ardennes, this small vehicle raced under fire, transporting troops, evacuating the wounded, scouting enemy lines, and delivering vital messages. Able to cross impossible terrain, the Jeeps surprised German generals, who found their panzers bogged down as these Allied off-road vehicles moved relentlessly. This chapter takes you to the front, where the Jeep proved to be more than just a vehicle. It was a symbol of mobility and resilience that changed the course of the war. In Operation Cobra, July 1944, Jeeps led the charge. A battalion of 200 Jeeps transported 1,000 soldiers, outflanking German positions at 20 miles per day. Equipped with radios, they coordinated airstrikes, while their four-wheel drive carried them over destroyed roads. One driver recounts, "The Jeep blew us away." This mobility, impossible for German vehicles, breached Nazi defenses. This chapter captures that speed, a factor that baffled the Wehrmacht. In reconnaissance, the Jeep was unbeatable. In Sicily, Jeeps scouted hills, detecting German positions ahead of the tanks. With a driver and an observer, they could send coordinates in minutes. In 1943, a Jeep evaded enemy fire in Tunisia, saving a patrol. One officer writes, "The Jeep was our eyes." This versatility, combined with its small size, made it invisible to the Germans. This chapter honors that agility, a pillar of Allied victory. In medical evacuations, the Jeep saved lives. In the Ardennes, below -20 degrees Celsius, Jeeps carried 1,000 wounded to field hospitals, crossing snow and fire. Equipped with stretchers, they could carry 2 wounded at a time. One doctor recounts, "Without the Jeep, we would have lost hundreds." This humanity, amid the chaos, boosted Allied morale, a contrast to German despair. This chapter celebrates that compassion, a testament to the Jeep's impact. In combat, Jeeps were lethal. Mounted with 50 machine guns, they pounded German positions. In Normandy, a platoon of 10 Jeeps destroyed a machine gun nest, moving at 50 miles per hour. One soldier writes, "The Jeep was a wolf with fangs." This audacity, made possible by its speed and abundance, surprised the Germans, who had expected heavy tanks. This chapter honors that bravery, a tactical shift that broke enemy lines. The Germans, with their Kübelwagens, were no match. In the mud of Italy, the Kübelwagens got stuck while the jeeps cruised on. In 1943, Germany lost 2,000 Kelvin-Kübelwagens to 200 jeeps. A German officer writes, "Their vehicles humiliate us." This gap, amplified by Allied mobility, eroded Nazi confidence. This chapter explores that powerlessness, a contrast to the versatility of the jeep. Communication depended on the jeep. At the Battle of Falaise, jeeps carried messages between units, coordinating the encirclement of 50,000 Germans. Equipped with SCR 536 radios, they maintained contact under bombardment. One operator recounts, "The jeep was our voice." This connectivity, impossible for the Germans without fuel, ensured Allied superiority. This chapter celebrates that role, a key factor in victory. Jeep drivers were heroes. Trained to drive under fire, they navigated impossible terrain. At Bastogne, one driver crossed a minefield, delivering supplies to the 101st Airborne. One soldier writes, "Without him, we would have fallen." This courage, backed by the jeep's reliability, inspired the Allies. This chapter honors their bravery, a driving force of the war. Mass production ensured jeeps were available for every mission. In 1944, 300,000 jeeps supported 2 million Allied soldiers. One worker recounts, "Each jeep was a piece of freedom." This abundance, in contrast to the 5,000 German Kübelwagen, overwhelmed the Wehrmacht. This chapter celebrates that scale, a pillar of victory. The German generals, observing the jeeps, were stunned. In Operation Market Garden, 1,000 jeeps moved the British 1st Airborne Forces past Nazi defenses. A German general writes, "Their vehicles are a plague." This unstoppable avalanche marked the Nazi decline. This chapter explores that awe, a sign of defeat. Allied logistics were impeccable. Mobile workshops repaired jeeps in hours using universal parts. By 1944, 500 workshops supported 300,000 jeeps. One mechanic recounts, "We kept the war rolling." This network, in contrast to German workshops without spare parts, ensured Allied mobility. This chapter honors that effort. Jeeps inspired new tactics. In the Pacific, flamethrower-equipped jeeps attacked Japanese bunkers. One officer writes, "The jeep was a surprise weapon." This adaptability, made possible by their abundance, surprised enemies. This chapter celebrates this tactical innovation. Allied morale soared with the jeep. Soldiers, driving under fire, felt a sense of freedom. At Caen, 200 jeeps flanked the Germans, allowing them to advance. One driver writes, "With the jeep, we were invincible." This chapter captures that confidence, a driving force behind victory. The Germans tried to counterattack, but their vehicles were inferior. In the Ardennes, Kübelwagen vehicles broke down in the snow, while the jeeps kept going. A German officer writes, "We can't move like them." This chapter explores this impotence, a contrast to Allied mobility. French civilians cheered the jeeps. In Paris, liberated in 1944, jeeps carried Allied soldiers through crowds. One resident writes, They were freedom on wheels. This chapter captures that resonance, a vehicle that inspired hope. Jeep production was a miracle. In 1944, 10 factories produced 300,000 Jeeps, compared to 4,000 Kelvin Subalwagen. One worker recounts, "Every Jeep was a step toward peace." This chapter celebrates that effort, a factor that overwhelmed the Wehrmacht. Jeep drivers innovated under pressure. In Italy, they used Jeeps to tow cannons, surprising the Germans. One driver writes, "We were the pioneers." This chapter honors that creativity, a key factor. The collaboration between Willys and Ford was vital. By 1944, they were producing 2,000 Jeeps a day. One engineer writes, "We worked as one." This unity ensured the Jeep avalanche. This chapter celebrates that synergy. The impact of the Jeep was universal. In the Pacific, Jeeps carried supplies through jungles. One soldier writes, "The Jeep was our lifeline." This chapter captures that omnipresence, a vehicle that changed the war. Chapter 4. The psychological factor. In 1944, German generals, hardened by the Blitzkrieg, faced an unexpected enemy, the psychological impact of the Willys Jeeps, which seemed to emerge endlessly on every front. As German soldiers, trapped in trenches without fuel, watched convoys of Allied Jeeps moving relentlessly, their morale crumbled. The abundance and mobility of these vehicles, contrasting with a Nazi scarcity, sowed despair in the Wehrmacht, which was unable to match the Allied onslaught. This chapter takes you to the heart of that shock, where a humble vehicle broke the will of an army that thought itself invincible. In Operation Cobra, Jeeps shattered German confidence. A battalion of 200 Jeeps flanked Nazi positions, moving troops at 20 miles per day. German soldiers, expecting heavy tanks, saw Jeeps appear along impossible roads. A German corporal writes, "Their vehicles are everywhere. We can't stop them." This omnipresence, made possible by mass production, created a feeling of helplessness. This chapter captures that fear, a factor that eroded Nazi morale. In the Ardennes, the Jeeps amplified the despondency. Under snow and bombardment, 500 Jeeps evacuated 1,000 wounded, while German Kübelwagen became bogged down. Nazi soldiers, short of fuel, abandoned positions at the sight of Allied Jeeps. One German officer writes, "Their Jeeps surround us. We are trapped." This contrast between Allied mobility and Nazi paralysis shattered Wehrmacht discipline. This chapter explores that collapse, a sign of German decline. German shortages were brutal. In 1944, the Wehrmacht had 4,000 operational Kübelwagens compared to 300,000 Allied Jeeps. Without oil, Nazi vehicles ground to a halt, while the Jeeps, with 15-gallon tanks, kept rolling. One German soldier writes, "Our tanks are dying of thirst. Your Jeeps are not." This disparity, amplified by Allied production, sowed despair. This chapter captures that frustration, a contrast to Allied abundance. Jeeps also inspired the Allies. Soldiers, driving under fire, felt empowered. At Falaise, 1,000 Jeeps surrounded 50,000 Germans, carrying supplies and troops. One driver recounts, "The Jeep made us feel invincible." This confidence, in contrast to Nazi discouragement, was a psychological weapon. This chapter celebrates that spark, an engine of victory. German generals, in their reports, described the Jeep as a nightmare. At Market Garden, 1,000 jeeps moved the 1st Airborne Forces past Nazi defenses. One general writes, "Their vehicles are a mobile plague." This unstoppable avalanche marked the Nazi collapse. This chapter explores that awe, a sign of defeat. Allied production was overwhelming. In 1944, 10 factories produced 300,000 jeeps, while Germany produced 4,000 Kelvin-Subel wagons. One worker recounts, "Every jeep was a blow to the enemy." This scale, backed by American industry, ensured the jeep's omnipresence. This chapter celebrates that effort, a pillar that demoralized the Wehrmacht. Jeep drivers were key. At Bastogne, they drove under heavy bombardment, bringing supplies to the 101st Airborne. One driver writes, "We were hope on wheels." This bravery, backed by the jeep's reliability, inspired the Allies and discouraged the Germans. This chapter honors their courage, a crucial psychological factor. The Germans tried to adapt, but their defenses collapsed. In Italy, Kubel wagons got stuck while jeeps crossed rivers. A German officer writes, "We can't move like them." This helplessness, in the face of Allied mobility, shattered Nazi morale. This chapter explores that desperation, a contrast to the agility of the jeep. Allied logistics were impeccable. Mobile workshops repaired jeeps in hours, while German vehicles waited weeks for spare parts. By 1944, 500 workshops supported 300,000 jeeps. One mechanic recounts, "We kept the war moving." This network, in contrast to Nazi paralysis, amplified the psychological impact. This chapter honors that effort. Jeeps inspired new tactics. At Caen, machine gun-mounted jeeps attacked German positions, moving at 50 miles per hour. One officer writes, "The jeep was a wolf of surprise." This adaptability, made possible by their abundance, baffled the Germans. This chapter celebrates this tactical innovation. German morale collapsed. By 1944, soldiers, short of fuel, were abandoning vehicles. One corporal writes, "We see jeeps as we starve." This desperation, amplified by Allied propaganda, led to mass surrenders. This chapter captures that collapse, a sign of the Nazi end. French civilians, liberated by jeeps, saw them as symbols of hope. In Paris, crowds cheered convoys of jeeps. One resident writes, "They were freedom on wheels." This resonance, contrasting with German despair, boosted Allied morale. This chapter celebrates that connection. Jeep production was a miracle. In 1944, 300,000 jeeps supported 2 million soldiers. One worker recounts, "Each jeep was a step toward peace." This scale, impossible for Germany, shattered Nazi morale. This chapter honors that industrial effort. Jeep drivers innovated under pressure. In the Ardennes, they used jeeps to tow cannons, surprising the Germans. One driver writes, "We were the pioneers." This creativity, backed by abundance, demoralized the Wehrmacht. This chapter honors that courage. The German generals, in their memoirs, admit their defeat. One general writes, "Jeeps are the blood of the enemy." This unstoppable avalanche marked the Nazi collapse. This chapter explores that recognition, a sign of Allied victory. The collaboration between Willys and Ford was vital. By 1944, they were producing 2,000 jeeps a day. One engineer writes, "We worked as one." This unity ensured the jeep's ubiquitous presence, discouraging the Germans. This chapter celebrates that synergy. Transportation logistics were key. In 1944, 50 Liberty ships carried 100,000 jeeps to Europe. One sailor recounts, "We were carrying freedom." This network, contrasting with the destroyed German ports, amplified the psychological impact. This chapter honors that effort. The impact of the jeep was universal. In the Pacific, jeeps carried supplies through jungles. One soldier writes, "The jeep was our lifeline." This chapter captures that omnipresence, a vehicle that broke enemy morale. Chapter 5. The Four-Wheeled Legacy. The Willys Jeep MB and Ford GPW didn't just help win World War II. They left a legacy that transcends the battlefield. From its role in the liberation of Europe to its transformation into a civilian icon, the Jeep became a symbol of resilience, freedom, and adventure. Its impact, which astonished German generals with its endless supply, inspired modern vehicles and helped rebuild a devastated world. This chapter explores how a humble off-roader changed history, from the trenches of Normandy to the world's roads, leaving an indelible mark. In 1944, Jeeps were key to victory. In Operation Cobra, 2,000 Jeeps outflanked the Germans, moving troops at 20 miles per day. In the Ardennes, they evacuated 1,000 wounded under fire. One soldier writes, "The Jeep was our lifeblood." This mobility, impossible for the Wehrmacht, secured Allied advances, breaching the Atlantic Wall. This chapter celebrates that contribution, a testament to the power of a simple vehicle. After the war, Jeeps rebuilt Europe. In 1945, 10,000 Jeeps delivered food and medicine to devastated villages. In France, Jeeps plowed fields, replacing destroyed tractors. A French farmer writes, "The Jeep gave us back our lives." This versatility, inherited from its military design, helped heal a continent. This chapter honors that humanity, a bridge between war and peace. The psychological impact endured. German generals, in their memoirs, described the Jeep as an unstoppable plague. At Falaise, 1,000 Jeeps surrounded 50,000 Nazis, forcing their surrender. A German general writes, "Their vehicles defeated us before their tanks." This despondency, caused by the onslaught of Jeeps, marked the Nazi collapse. This chapter explores that impact, a sign of the Allied victory. The Jeep's design inspired the future. In the 1,950 seconds, Willys launched the CJ2 Amperes, the first civilian off-road vehicle used on farms and in the jungle. In 1963, the Jeep Wagoneer ushered in the SUV era. One engineer writes, "The Jeep showed us freedom on wheels." This heritage, born in 1941, transformed the automotive industry. This chapter celebrates that innovation, a legacy that lives on today. Jeep production was a miracle. By 1945, 600,000 Jeeps had been built, compared to 10,000 Kubelwagens. One worker recounts, "Each Jeep was a piece of hope." This scale, backed by American industry, ensured Allied supremacy and the reconstruction of Europe. This chapter honors that effort, a pillar of victory. The Jeep drivers were heroes. At Bastogne, they drove under shelling, saving the 101st Airborne. One driver writes, "We were the lifeblood of the army." This bravery, combined with the Jeep's reliability, inspired generations. This chapter honors their courage, a driving force of war and peace. European civilians viewed the Jeep as a symbol of freedom. In Paris, liberated in 1944, crowds cheered convoys of Jeeps. One resident writes, "They were the promise of a new world." This resonance, contrasting with Nazi despair, boosted Allied morale. This chapter captures that hope, a vehicle that united hearts. The Germans tried to copy the Jeep but failed. By 1945, their collapsed industry could not replicate its simplicity. A German engineer writes, "The Jeep was unattainable." This helplessness, in the face of the Allied onslaught, marked the end of the Nazis. This chapter explores that frustration, a contrast to American innovation. The collaboration between Willys and Ford was key. By 1945, they were producing 2,000 Jeeps a day, supporting Reconstruction. One engineer writes, "We were working for peace." This unity, inherited from the war, ensured the Jeep's impact in the post-war period. This chapter celebrates that synergy. Jeeps inspired new tactics. In the post-war period, armies adopted Jeep-based off-road vehicles. In Korea, the M38, the successor to the Willys, carried troops across mountains. One officer writes, "The Jeep changed warfare forever." This chapter honors that influence, a global tactical shift. Allied logistics was a triumph. By 1945, 500 workshops were repairing Jeeps for rebuilding. One mechanic recounts, "We kept hope rolling." This network, in contrast to Nazi paralysis, ensured the Jeep's impact. This chapter honors that logistical effort. Allied morale, boosted by the Jeep, was unwavering. In 1945, soldiers celebrated victory in Jeeps. One driver writes, "With the Jeep, we won the world." This confidence, inherited from the battlefield, inspired Reconstruction. This chapter captures that spark. Jeeps also helped in the Pacific. In the Philippines, they carried supplies through jungles. One soldier writes, "The Jeep was our lifeline." This ubiquity, made possible by mass production, shaped the Jeep's legacy. This chapter celebrates that versatility. The Germans, in their memoirs, admit their defeat. One general writes, "The Jeeps were the blood of the enemy." This unstoppable avalanche marked the Nazi collapse. This chapter explores that recognition, a sign of Allied victory. Jeep production was a miracle. In 1945, 10 factories produced 100,000 Jeeps for Reconstruction. One worker recounts, "Every Jeep was a step toward peace." This effort, impossible for Germany, ensured the Jeep's impact. This chapter honors that scale. Jeep drivers innovated in the post-war period. In Europe, they used Jeeps to plow fields, adapting them to peacetime. One driver writes, "The Jeep was our future." This creativity, inherited from the war, inspired generations. This chapter honors that innovation. International collaboration strengthened the legacy. In the 1,950 seconds, Jeeps were exported to Japan and Germany, helping with Reconstruction. One engineer writes, "The Jeep united the world." This chapter celebrates that global connection, a legacy of unity. The Jeep's impact was universal. In the 1,960 seconds, civilian off-road vehicles, inspired by the Jeep, took over the roads. One civilian driver writes, "The Jeep gave us freedom." This chapter captures that resonance, a vehicle that changed lives. In the shattered fields of Europe, Between 1941 and 1945, a small American vehicle, the Willys Jeep, became a heartbeat of freedom. With its humble roar and seemingly endless supply, it tore through mud, snow, and fire, carrying soldiers, hopes, and the promise of a free world. German generals, from Rommel to Guderian, watched in disbelief as these machines, born in the factories of Toledo and Detroit, overflowed their lines, shattering their morale and their myth of invincibility. This audiobook has traced that epic journey, from the assembly lines to the trenches, revealing how the Jeep not only changed the war, but the souls of those who drove and faced it. The impact of the Jeep was colossal. In Operation Cobra, 2,000 Jeeps outflanked the Nazis, moving troops at 20 miles a day, while in the Ardennes, they evacuated 1,000 wounded in blizzards. Each Jeep, one of 600,000 built, was a miracle of ingenuity. Simple, rugged, unstoppable. A captured German general wrote bitterly, "Their vehicles were a tide we could not stem." But behind every Jeep was a factory worker in Detroit, a mother assembling parts, a driver risking his life. This final chapter mourns the losses on both sides, but celebrates the spirit that led the Allies to victory. The psychological toll was profound. For German soldiers, trapped in trenches without fuel, the Jeeps were a vision of defeat. Swarms of Allied vehicles crossing impossible paths, their Kubelwagens rusting away. A young Nazi corporal wrote, "Your Jeeps stole our hope. That fear, sown by Allied abundance, crumbled the Wehrmacht, turning its pride into surrender." But for the Allies, each Jeep was a beacon. A driver in Bastogne, carrying supplies under fire, recalls, "We felt the world depended on us." This audiobook captures those voices, a chorus of bravery and despair that echoes throughout the story. In the hearts of the Allies, the Jeep was more than metal. It was the friend who never failed, the horse that galloped under bullets, the bridge to freedom. In Paris, liberated in 1944, crowds wept at the sight of Jeeps parading by, loaded with smiling soldiers. A French child recounts, "Jeeps were the promise of a new day. The workers, working endless shifts, knew that every screw was a step toward peace. The women in the factories, the mechanics at the front, the liberated civilians, all shared the heartbeat of the Jeep, a symbol of unity that defeated tyranny." The Jeep's legacy transcends war. In 1945, 10,000 Jeeps plowed fields in Europe, brought medicine to villages, and rebuilt broken roads. Its design gave birth to the CJ2 Amperes, the first civilian off-roader, and the Wagoneer, the father of modern SUVs. A European farmer writes, "The Jeep gave us back the land. It gave us back our life." Today, every off-roader on the road carries the DNA of the Willys, an echo of 1944 that screams freedom. This audiobook honors that heritage, a reminder that a humble vehicle can move mountains and heal nations. But this story is, above all, human. German soldiers, facing the tide of Jeeps, fought courageously to the bitter end, writing letters to families they would never see again. Allied drivers, risking everything on every mission, left dreams behind. Civilians, from Detroit to Normandy, carried the weight of war in their hands and hearts. Their stories, woven into the Jeep tires, remind us of the cost of freedom. Every life lost, every tear shed, every hope reborn. This audiobook embraces their sacrifices, a tapestry of humanity that gleams beneath the dust of war. As the sun rises over the fields where the Jeeps roared, we honor all those who shaped this story. The Germans, whose pride vanished before the Allied tide, the soldiers, workers, and civilians who forged victory, and the Jeep, a humble four-wheeled hero who led the world toward light. Subscribe, ring the bell, and carry with you this tale of courage and resilience, an echo of engines that still resonates in our freedom. May the legacy of the Jeep inspire us to keep moving forward, always, without stopping, toward a future of peace.